Thank you so much, everyone, for coming in for day 3 of the HS Awareness Virtual Summit. I am so excited about today because this is a great conversation about diet, nutrition, and HS. And as you know, there's a lot of misinformation about diet, nutrition, and HS. So I'm so glad that we have Jillian here, who is going to clarify some of that information for us and answer as many of your questions as possible. I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors because without them, none of this would be able to happen. I want to give a shout out to the Hidradenitis Suppurativa Foundation, the Mama IU, HydraWare, 100-page journals, Designs by Muriel, HS Connect, Hope for HS, and Ship 11. Thank you so much for making this event happen and for donating your time, your talent, and your resources to bring awareness to HS. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jillian, who is a nutritionist and a health coach, and she helps patients like ourselves to map out diet plans that are specifically for HS. So I want to provide you with the platform to introduce yourself and we can get started.
Hi, thanks everyone. My name is Ondreyka. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and I specialize in nutrition for HS. I'm so excited for everyone that's here. Looks like there's about 27 attending tonight, so that's great. As you can see on the slide, I do have a few different credentials after my name, and so I'll kind of run down what each of those are. I have a lot of different interests, and I pursued some different credentials. So the first one is my master's in public health, and then the next one is a registered dietitian nutritionist, and the next one stands for Integrative and Functional Nutrition Certified Practitioner, which means that I believe in a food as medicine and real food approach. And then lastly, I have my IBCLC, which is International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. So that means I help with breastfeeding. And then what I've mostly been doing for LEAP is, or for HS is LEAP. So I'm a certified LEAP therapist, and LEAP stands for Lifestyle, Eating, and Performance. And this is a personalized anti-inflammatory program that uses a blood test to determine your food sensitivities. And LEAP has been shown to reduce inflammation and help conditions like fibromyalgia, IBS, and migraines. So this is why I use the approach for HS, because I believe it's the most effective anti-inflammatory eating protocol. I think I forgot to mention that my private practice is called Embrace Health Nutrition, so that's also on the slide. And there are plenty of ways to eat healthy, and I am here to support you in whatever way is your nutrition goal. So this is my disclaimer slide. This talk is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. And I do want to empower you to take this information to your doctors and dermatologists and ask them what they think about it for your case, because they're going to have your specific medical information. So throughout my presentation, I have a few slides where I have a couple of doctor icons to indicate if something is a good thing to talk to your doctor about. And also, HS is a very personal illness with a very personal triggers. So what helps one person might not help another, which makes it really frustrating to deal with, as we know. So these strategies might not work for everyone, but I am sharing them in the hopes that it helps someone. And I think the more that we share what works for us and other people hear it, the more we'll be able to help each other out. And also, if you need to find a doctor who specializes in HS, I have the HS Connect search here. There's also one, I believe, on Hope for HS website and HS Foundation. So I'd like to start by sharing my story and how I got into this work. I have HS myself. I've had it since I was a teenager, and I really came to notice the connection between what I ate and my flares. And so for me, dairy is a huge trigger. And I live in Michigan, where, you know, the dairy industry is a big deal. There's a lot of dairy farms over here. And a few years ago, I went on a trip to a dairy farm with my family, and we did a tour, and we, got to see the cows being milked. And then at the end, we had ice cream and then bought milk fresh from the farm. So I was drinking a lot more milk than I usually do. And I had so many HS spots, like a breakout of those. And it kind of was like, oh, a light bulb went off. And I said, there's really a connection here between drank a bunch of milk and then now I'm experiencing more HS. So that was really a turning point for me and helped realize that what I was eating contributed to my disease. So here's actually some real pictures from that trip. And in retrospect, the attack cow sign is really funny because it ended up being a food trigger for me. So after realizing I had this chronic illness that I'd have to, learn how to manage, I went to the HS symposium. So I think it's the Symposium on Hidradenitis Suppurativa Advances. That acronym always trips me up. So that was in 2019, and I was just really amazed by the community and all the doctors, and everyone was really compassionate and enthused with their work and research and really wanting to help the community. So in the opening remarks, one of the doctors actually talked about diet and how they wanted to increase nutrition research. So that really got my attention, and I was like, maybe I can do some help here. Maybe I have something to offer to other people with HS. So that is how I started seeing other people with HS and helping them through diet. And through some individual experimentation and medical research, it is becoming apparent that nutrition has an important role in managing HS. Foods can either contribute to flares or help calm the inflammation in your body and encourage healing. So I work with clients to identify their food triggers and guide and empower them to make lifestyle changes. And I also like to partner with them to develop a nutrition plan that will fit into their lifestyle. So as I mentioned, I really think that there is a place for nutrition in the treatment of HS. And in this study, only 1/3 of participants reported receiving nutritional counseling from a healthcare provider. So to me, this highlights the opportunity to improve patient education and why I'm working on this effort to fill the gap. So what is hidradenitis suppurativa? If you're here, I'm guessing you know, since it's HS Awareness Week and this is a group of patients. But just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'm going to run down the definition that I have. So it's defined as a chronic inflammatory skin disease characterized by painful nodules and abscesses, which form most commonly in sensitive areas, so under your arms and breasts, along buttocks and groin, though HS may appear anywhere where there's hair. So HS is also considered a chronic relapsing disorder of defective folliculosebaceous units. So I'm going to call that FPSUs from now on because that's really long to say. And that is the hair unit, just to simplify it. And I'm not a dermatologist, so that's my disclaimer there. While the precise cause of HS is yet unknown, researchers do think that there are multiple causes going on, including bacteria, a dysregulated immune system, and a combination of genetic and environmental factors that trigger inflammatory pathways. So I'm going to kind of be bringing up these things later as we talk about different items for nutrition. Studies are still figuring out how each item plays a role. And so, they're still trying to untangle how to target different things for HS. So the figure on this slide shows the potential causes of HS, the inflammation, the follicular occlusion or blockage, and neutrophils, which are white blood cells, and pro-inflammatory cytokines. And cytokines are things that are secreted by your immune cells. And also the bacterial microbial colonization is shown. And so it remains unclear at this point whether that results from the disease or if it contributes to how the disease is working, the pathophysiology. So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. That's my understanding. So I wanted to have this first slide to make sure that we kind of talk about some of the causes and some of the pathways that nutrition can affect. So I see managing HS as a puzzle, and there are different pieces that might help you. So for example, using the medications or topicals that your doctor prescribes, managing your stress, having a surgery, reducing friction, and identifying foods that can help or hurt you. So by trying out different therapies, you'll hopefully be able to see what works for you, and you can put that into your care plan. So what makes up your care plan or puzzle might be different for everyone. Mine might be different than yours. So on that note, I highly recommend keeping a health journal to help you identify your triggers. And this is a handout that I made in partnership with hsconnect.org. So it's a free download on my website, and it's also on their website. And it's just a place so you can print out some copies and track your flares, and you can write different notes and see if you can find any connections. So I want to set the mood of the webinar too by telling you about my food philosophy. So I believe that food is a powerful tool for health and wellness, and that there are a lot of different ways to eat healthy. There's a lot of diet plans out there, a lot of different paths, and not one thing is going to fit for everyone. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about nutrition and there being good and bad foods. So these ideas about food can lead to feelings of shame, blame, or guilt, which frankly, doesn't feel good for anyone. So at the end of the day, your body sees all food as fuel. So not necessarily good or bad. And later I'm going to get into the science of how some foods might be affecting HS. You can still choose to eat those foods if you want to. And in fact, I encourage you to do so if that is, going to feed your soul and that's something that's really going to bring you joy in the moment, and not to feel guilty about it. A lot of the work that I do is to help people identify their food triggers and how much they might be able to handle of a certain food without having a symptom. So some foods can be tolerated in small amounts and some can't, unfortunately. So it's all about figuring out the right food for your body. I want to empower you with this knowledge, and you can choose what to do with it, if anything. So another slide to kind of get a baseline, everyone on the same page for nutrition basics. Nutrients are divided into two major categories. We have macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients, hence the name macro, are needed in large amounts in your body, and micro, which is smaller, are needed in smaller amounts. Protein provides a basic structure to your bones, muscles, and skin. Also, enzymes and hormones play a role in chemical reactions. Fat is needed for synthesis of hormones and other compounds that regulate body processes. Along with storing energy, fats are a component in cell membranes and help regulate temperature. Carbohydrates are a source of energy for your brain and red blood cells, and they also play a role in the nervous system, heart, and kidney function. And all this on this slide, there could be so many more directions I took this, but I tried to simplify it into just a few chunks here. So the next thing for carbohydrates, we have simple carbohydrates, which are one or two basic sugars that are linked together. And these are very easily broken down and absorbed quickly to provide a fast burst of energy. So you can think of simple carbs as a single bead in a bracelet. So like the picture on my slide here. And it's easy to take that one bead and digest it. Complex carbohydrates are long chains of sugars that are connected. So the body has to break these down into the simple sugars. The complex carbs are like the bracelet in this picture, so all the beads are on it, and each bead needs to be taken off the string to be broken down into more manageable pieces to digest. So as you can imagine, that process takes longer. The glycemic index is used to describe how various carbohydrates affect blood glucose or blood sugar. Because they are easy to digest, the simple carbs are more likely to spike your blood sugar quickly, which is the red line on the graph, whereas the complex carbs need more time to be taken apart and digested, having less of an impact on your blood sugar, which is the blue line. So choosing the complex carbohydrates help you regulate your blood sugar and reduces those high spikes. Another way to help regulate blood sugar is to always eat carbs, fat, and protein. So when eaten together, the blood sugar doesn't raise as quickly or as high. So that helps to mitigate those spikes and dips in your blood sugar. And micronutrients include vitamins, minerals, and water. Vitamins are involved in nearly every chemical reaction in the body. Some actually function as hormones, which is pretty cool. And minerals take part in chemical reactions. Some play a role in muscle movement and body structure. So to help you remember some of the information on the previous slide, you can use this low glycemic plate. So you can aim to make half of your plate non-starchy veggies, a quarter of your plate carbs, and preferably those low glycemic index carbs and whole grains, and the last quarter of your plate protein and fat. And also a reminder to stay hydrated and drink to thirst. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get back to my food philosophy. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and I'm sure you've probably heard it before. It's really popular. Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food, is a quote attributed to the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates nearly 2,500 years ago. And a related quote is that all disease begins in the gut, which I like to reframe to good health starts in the gut. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an integrative and functional nutrition certified practitioner. and I believe in lifestyle as medicine. So as an IFNCP, I put the relationship between my client and myself at the center of care and use the best available evidence with my professional expertise and my client values to improve outcomes. So one part of my food philosophy is to think of the whole person and to integrate other practices that can help them on their health journey. There is a dynamic interplay of our genes, diet, environment, and lifestyle that can either help or harm our health. So thinking of all of these things together is called lifestyle as medicine. And tonight I'm going to focus on healthful nutrition. I like to think of managing HS from a whole mind and body approach. There are various things that might be feeding into your HS flare. You might be able to handle one or two things, but when they start piling up is when you might experience symptoms. So I'm going to make an analogy here using a ditch, so bear with me. I'm from a very small rural town in Michigan, and I can definitely think of some really steep ditches along some roads out here. So one of these days I'm going to grab a picture for my slides. So falling into the ditch is equal to having an HS flare. And the things in our life, some we can control and some we can't control, might take us closer to or farther away from that ditch. For example, if we're having reactions to foods, that takes us one step closer to the ditch. We had a stressful day at work or, in general with family, that takes us one step closer. And another thing that might contribute is hot weather or sweating, one step closer to the ditch. And then we fall in and lose our hats like this icon here. I thought that was so cute. I had to pick that one. So all these things added together have pushed us over the edge, and now we have a flare. So the ditch is steep, but you can still climb out of it. That's why I didn't use like a cliff analogy. You can still get yourself out. If you're able to see where you're walking, it's easier to avoid that ditch, right? So what I hope I can help you with throughout this webinar is to help you think about identifying your personal triggers that take you one step closer to the ditch and which things take you away from the ditch. For example, avoiding your food triggers might take you a step away from the ditch. Reducing your stress might take you a step away. Taking your medications that are different things that your doctor prescribes might take you a step away. And just to note too, the examples that I used just cover a few things. There are really just so many things I could have chosen to put there, and you probably are thinking of some as well. So the point is that we want to do more of the steps that take us away from the ditch and away from those flares. So we want to stack the deck in our favor by doing things that help us reduce the flares and manage our HS. This sounds awesome, right? Well, as you're probably thinking, it's a lot easier said than done, and it does take some work, but I believe it is possible. So the tricky part is identifying what your personal steps are, and one tool you can use to figure that out is the journal I mentioned a few slides ago. So I highly recommend downloading that and trying it out. So let's get into some of the connections between HS and nutrition. This is a very sciencey infographic showing the pathways of how the breakdown of foods such as dairy, red meat, and carbs cause that follicular inflammation and the HS flares or nodules that we see. So in research studies and other diseases, there's quite a bit of evidence showing that certain foods can help with inflammation, but we don't understand exactly how they're having these beneficial effects. And we also don't fully understand the connection between nutrition and HS, but the research articles do have various theories that I've listed here. So the first is that diet can decrease the production of inflammatory mediators in your body. So diet helps by decreasing inflammation. And then the second is that the effects are through the gut-skin immune axis. So foods influence your gut microbiome, and this has an impact on your systemic immune response. So the majority of your immune cells are actually located within your gut-associated lymphoid tissue, which is called GALT for short. And actually 70% of your immune system is in your gut. So the tissue is located in an inner mucosal layer, and it communicates regularly with the nearby gut microbiome, which is located inside your GI tract. So while GALT and the microbiome reside in different areas of your GI tract, there may be cases where GALT immune cells come into direct contact with the gut microbiota or nutrients. So for example, if you have intestinal permeability, which is better known as leaky gut. Excuse me a moment. So the gut microbiome plays an important role in the development and maintenance of gut. The food we eat and the environmental factors that you're in have the ability to change the composition of the gut microbiome over time, either favorably or unfavorably. And key dietary components that play a favorable role on the gut microbiome include probiotics and prebiotics. And so to optimize our gut functioning, we must pay attention to the health of our gut microbiome. So this slide and this concept are very important. This is the explanation of how nutrition can play a role in healing a variety of health conditions. It's because 70% of your immune system is actually in your gut. Another connection we have is between your brain and your gut. So there are two main ways that they communicate. The first is through the direct connection that they have to the vagus nerve and your nervous system. And the second way is that they're connected by chemicals called neurotransmitters. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that increases your feelings of happiness. And gut microbes actually produce some of the serotonin in our bodies, which I think is just super cool and fascinating. Another connection that researchers are finding is evidence that the irritation in our GI system may send signals to our nervous system that trigger mood changes. So also connection with mood there. And the microbiome is a hot topic in research, and it's also being studied in relation to HS, which is pretty cool. I'm still waiting on some of the published studies for that. So I'm going to talk more generally. The reduced microbiome diversity is correlated with an excess weight and increased calorie harvesting. So this means that actually your gut microbiome, if you have the bad bugs, let's just call them, in your gut, they actually absorb more calories from your food than a healthy microbiome does. So that's how they can lead to excess weight. The reduced microbiome diversity also has more systemic inflammation, insulin resistance, and high cholesterol. So eating fiber is anti-inflammatory through the effects of the microbiome. And there's a link between having a diverse microbiome, so lots of different bacteria in your gut, and an overall effective metabolism, which I think everyone can be happy about that one, right? And the gut microbiome is responsible for the synthesis of some vitamins like biotin, B12, folic acid, and vitamin K. And microbes can also affect your cravings, your food cravings. So the high fiber foods feed the good microbes in your gut, and the high fiber diet provides a positive balance of microbes. So the good gut bugs make short chain fatty acids that strengthen your gut wall. So that will strengthen that intestinal barrier, and that strong barrier keeps the microbes and other large molecules from escaping your GI tract and getting into your bloodstream. And when there is not enough fiber to eat, these bacteria can actually start eating the mucosal lining, which can compromise the integrity of your gut wall. And once that happens, that's how the foreign bodies are able to enter your bloodstream and cause an overactive immune response. So on a positive note, new research is showing that compounds in mushrooms and grains like oats or barley called beta-glucans have both immune building and prebiotic properties that enhance the growth of some of our good gut bugs, as well as protecting our gut lining. And beta-glucans have also been linked to lower cholesterol levels. Pre and probiotics can improve your gut health. The probiotic-rich foods include cultured foods like yogurt and kefir. For HS, you might want to check if dairy bothers you first before you try those. Other sources include unpasteurized fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, carrots, radishes, and other fermented veggies. You can ferment a bunch of them. So these foods provide beneficial gut bugs and reduce the presence of less favorable gut bacteria. And as a bonus, fermentation has been shown to increase the antioxidant activity and availability of the nutrients in the foods that are being fermented. Prebiotics are the undigestible compounds of foods that feed our microbes. So there's some crossover with the fiber category. Specific types of fiber called inulin or fructooligosaccharides, which is FOS for short, found in foods like onions, garlic, maple syrup, and bananas. Studies have shown that regular inclusion of those food groups has helped to improve cardiovascular and joint inflammation. And on another note, kind of on the flip side, that type of fiber can also cause bloating and gas. And so they are limited in a low FODMAP diet, which you may have heard of, that's commonly used to treat IBS. And as with anything, there is individual variation in how your body in particular is going to respond to probiotics. So some people really notice a benefit, some people don't notice anything at all. So just there's a variation there. And lifestyle and environmental factors may also affect your responsiveness. And a little note here for HS, some fermented foods use yeast, which may be an issue for HS. So with the fermented foods, you want to start with just a small portion and then eat it with your meals, and also look for products that have no added sugars, because the sugar is going to promote the yeast growth. So now getting into some of the HS research. In this survey of over 240 HS patients, 75.6% practiced dietary alterations. And of those who made changes, the majority thought that they perceived a positive change in their HS due to those changes. And this paper notes that it's hard to identify the foods that are helpful or harmful. Most patients reported that they were unable to identify the foods, which I find very interesting. So they also found that it's easier to identify the foods that made it worse, exacerbating foods, than it was to identify the alleviating foods. And so this is why using that journal can be helpful. So what does the research say about food triggers? Most of the research I'm going to share today are small studies, which unfortunately is what we have right now in HS, but I did want to share everything that I was able to find to help us. So this is that same survey. Actually, this might be a different one. The study surveyed over 744 people with HS, and 237 answered the question about which foods were exacerbating. And this is all self-reported by people with HS. So this study found that the most common foods that triggered HS were sweets, bread, pasta, dairy, and high-fat foods. In the next section, I'm going to get to the flip side of this graph. A high glycemic diet is thought to activate HS. High glycemic foods include the foods listed here, like white bread, crackers, candy, etc., those type of things. And I'm bringing this graph back to show you that the simple carbs like this that have a high glycemic index that spikes your blood sugar or blood glucose. And because there is that rise in blood glucose, this triggers a release of insulin. And insulin is a hormone whose job it is to help your body turn the blood sugar into energy. So the insulin tells your cells to open up and let the glucose in for storage. So when you're eating these simple carbs and your blood sugar spikes, this increases the amount of insulin needed to store all of that glucose. So this increase in insulin contributes to the HS flares. So because of that, the high glycemic diets may be the initial trigger for plugging those FPSUs that are common to HS. And the high levels of insulin may increase your risk for having insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, and heart disease, along with promoting inflammation and also causing a hormone imbalance. So on a positive note, I'm going to get to the positive side too in a minute. Half hour after finishing a meal, if you go on an easy walk for just 15 minutes, like, just moderate, don't have to be like jogging or anything like that, you can lower your blood sugar. So it's kind of like, I've heard other practitioners refer to it as like magic for blood sugar. Just going on an easy walk after meals can really help level out your blood sugar and bring it down. So that's something that I recommend fitting into your lifestyle if you can. And again, I know depending on your HS activity, that one might be difficult. So HS, as I mentioned, is the chronic relapsing disorder of those defective FPSUs, and that those get blocked. And those FPSUs are actually also under the influence of endogenous, which is inside your body, reproductive hormones, exogenous hormones, so that's outside your body, androgens, and other dietary factors like casein and whey. So dairy promotes higher levels of insulin and insulin-like growth factor, which exposes the FPSUs to androgens, which then is activating HS. And for women with PCOS, the higher levels of insulin are correlated with higher androgens. So lowering your insulin levels can reduce the androgen levels, and you can lower your insulin and androgens through nutrition and exercise. Brewer's yeast, baker's yeast, and nutritional yeast are all forms of saccharomyces cerevisiae, and this is an ingredient that helps food rise, and it's found in bread, pizza, cakes, beer, wine, and cheese. So there's been a few studies about yeast and HS, and Of the 37 people who followed a yeast-free diet, 70% of them had improved HS when they eliminated the brewer's yeast, and 87% of those had a recurrence of HS with yeast in less than a week if they ate it either on accident or on purpose. They also tested 4 of them for food intolerances, and then they did find a few. So the authors suggested that a form of food intolerance might be the missing link to understand HS, which I think is really cool. And that is also one of the reasons I use the food sensitivity test in my practice. And I'm going to talk more about that at the end. Red and processed meat promotes inflammation in your body. Leucine, an amino acid found in red meat and dairy products, stimulates the insulin and insulin growth factor 1 pathways, which is associated with HS lesional severity. Red and processed meat include beef, lamb, pork, sausage, bacon, deli meat, and hot dogs. And then lastly on our potential trigger list, are nightshades. So this is a family of foods that are thought to increase intestinal permeability because they contain components like glycoalkaloid poison, which is solanine, alpha-tomatine, and capsaicin. So when potatoes are green, if you have ever seen green potatoes, that means that they have even higher levels of solanine. So don't eat green potatoes. And even if they're not green, they still have solanine in them. So about 60% of the solanine actually is in the potato peel. So if you're sensitive to solanine, if you peel the potato, you might be okay. But if you're really sensitive to it, then even that might be too much. So trial and error there too. Nightshades include the white potatoes. The only potatoes not included are sweet potatoes. Nightshades include eggplant, tomatoes, goji berries, Cape gooseberries, huckleberries, ashwagandha, which is an herb, peppers, and then the spices made from those peppers. So what can we eat to help HS? This is getting back to the other side of the graph. So this was the survey of 744 people. And if you remember, there was about 237 that answered which foods were bad for them, and only 89 answered which foods they thought were helpful. So I think that's just really interesting and illustrates the point, like it's hard to figure this out. And this is all self-reported by people with HS. So from the people that did respond, the foods that they reported as helping were vegetables, chicken, fruits, and fish. So the chicken, fish, and meat we think might be helping because they contain zinc and B12, and there have been studies to show that supplementing with those 2 things can help HS, or might help HS. And one of the authors on this paper is a registered dietitian, so of course I had to mention that. And the paper speculates that the fruits and vegetables may increase the gut microbiome biodiversity, which I talked about earlier, and that dietary patterns can alter your gut microbiome, which modulates that inflammatory response, and it potentially is affecting your disease activity. So vitamin D, I love talking about vitamin D, has a role in blood pressure regulation, bone growth, calcium balance, hormone production, immune function, and nervous system function. So definitely, I encourage everyone always, all the time, get your vitamin D level checked because a lot of people are deficient. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. There have been a few studies looking at HS and vitamin D, and HS has been found to be associated with a major vitamin D deficiency, and they define this as less than 30 nanograms per milliliter. And so then they supplemented those patients, and they found that their HS nodules decreased significantly, and the patients saw an improvement. So the potential mechanisms behind how this might be helping is that it reinforces your innate immunity and may prevent the follicular obstruction that is implicated in HS. So thinking back to the slide at the beginning where I talked about the potential causes of HS, and one of them being a dysregulated immune system. So that's the connection here. You can get vitamin D through sun exposure and also through foods. And here are some of the foods you can focus on, which are salmon, tuna, egg, and dairy. For most people, it's hard to get enough through sun and food alone, especially if you're avoiding dairy because it could be an HS trigger like me. So in those cases, which is almost everyone, recommend supplements to help you meet your vitamin D needs. And supplements can interact with foods and medicines, so I recommend checking with your doctor first or talking to your pharmacist. So here's the slide. Do you get enough vitamin D? It might depend on where you live. So as you can see, there's a red line across this map here. So very little, if any, vitamin D can be synthesized in your skin from November through February at latitudes that are north of that line, which is 37. So it's all the area shaded in gray. And some sources that I've read even say the 33rd parallel, so that would be even further south here. And so the people who live in these areas are at relatively greater risk for vitamin D deficiency. So usually I have a food first rule when it comes to eating and supplements, but for vitamin D, it's just so hard to get enough through food alone and through the sun, because when we are in the sun, we're protecting our skin with sunscreen and hats and clothing to make sure that we're protecting our skin, and that blocks the vitamin D absorption. So because it's so important to have enough of this critical nutrient and it's connected to our immune system, I often recommend supplements. And you do want to make sure that you have the best absorbed form of this, which is vitamin D3. And so that's going to be the form that is best used by your body. So zinc has a role in growth and development, immune function, nervous system function, protein formation, reproduction, and taste and smell, and wound healing. So I highlighted or put in bold the immune function and wound healing for us. So similar to vitamin D, lower levels of zinc have been associated with more severe disease. Zinc is anti-inflammatory and also anti-androgenic. And again, those androgens are a type of hormone that can activate HS. So there's been a couple studies on zinc supplements in HS. And in the one I have here, they were taking 90 milligrams of zinc gluconate, and it helped people achieve remission. So also, like vitamin D, the mechanism of how it works may be through boosting innate immunity. And again, thinking back to that slide at the beginning where I was mentioning HS potentially being caused by a dysregulated immune system. So that immune connection here too. Food sources of zinc include beef, pork chop, beans, chicken, and pumpkin seeds. And in general, supplementing with minerals can cause some GI upset. So this can get better if you take it with food, especially like a heavier meal like lunch or dinner. And then I always recommend too starting with a low dose so that you can go up from there and like your body can adjust. So it's better to buy supplements that are in a form that is best absorbed. So for zinc, the form I like is zinc picolinate. And also for zinc, taking supplements long-term can cause a copper deficiency. So it's best to take a zinc supplement that includes some copper in it. And the ratio is 15 milligrams of zinc to 1 milligram of copper, or a similar ratio. I've heard other ones too. And again, the warning about potential medication food interactions. So always check that with your doctor. And eating a low glycemic diet is diets are high in fruit, vegetables, fish, and low in carbs. These diets help lower your blood sugar levels, helps with weight loss, and lowers your risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. So if you remember the high glycemic diet slide, it's like all the opposite, the flip side of that. So this diet is recommended in HS to reduce the insulin spikes that come from having high glycemic foods. And so if you're reducing those insulin spikes, you're hopefully reducing the HS flares, because those insulin spikes are one thing that feeds into them, and inflammation. Speaking of inflammation, omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids have well-documented anti-inflammatory properties, which makes it a pretty good candidate as a nutrient to think about for HS to include food sources and or supplements. So we have fish, seeds, oils, fortified foods, and your supplements. So food sources of omega-3s are correlated with a greater diversity of gut bugs, which is good for your microbiome. And another thing good for your microbiome, as I mentioned earlier, is fiber. So the good gut bugs really love fiber, and the fiber is metabolized by the gut microbiome to the short-chain fatty acids, which are the fuel for your intestinal mucosa, and also associated with that anti-inflammatory effect and the strengthening of your gut barrier function. And so fiber can reduce inflammation and help heal or prevent leaky gut. And turmeric is an antioxidant that has anti-inflammatory properties. And you can use this as a spice in cooking. It's commonly found in curry, and you can really add it to anything you want for an anti-inflammatory boost. And I'm kind of smiling because last night I was sauteing some spinach and I just threw some turmeric on it. I was like, why not? Anti-inflammatory. And a common way I know Jasmine talked about before, I remember you talked about this last year, is to drink it in a warm tea drink, and this is referred to as golden milk. So there are different recipes for this. The one I like is to use turmeric in a non-dairy milk, so either like coconut milk or Ripple is the product I really like. It's made from peas. And I also like to pair it with some cinnamon and ginger. And ginger really helps for nausea, which is always kind of on my mind because my other specialty is pregnancy nutrition. And then another type of diet is the Mediterranean diet, which is something you've probably heard about before. There's been a ton of studies about the Mediterranean diet, and it's talked about a lot in the media. And the foundation for this is similar to low glycemic index, which is vegetables, fruits, herbs, nuts, beans, and whole grains. And this diet is high in antioxidants and polyphenols. Plant-based diets like this are increasing our gut microbiome diversity, which then modulates the inflammatory response. And a Mediterranean diet is thought to decrease the HS severity through the anti-inflammatory effects. So quick note on supplements, if you are going to try one, I want to talk about some safety tips. So supplements are not reviewed by the FDA for safety and effectiveness, which means that they could potentially contain harmful contaminants or not even contain what the label says. There was a study done in New York in 2014 that took the supplements and these were herbal supplements, that did DNA testing, and 4 out of 5 of the products did not actually contain evidence of what they said was in the bottle, and they actually found contaminants that were not listed on the label. So it can be kind of scary out there because they're not regulated. So that's why I always recommend that you find a professional grade supplement, because these are tested by independent companies to make sure that there are no contaminants that could harm you. We also make sure there's no unnecessary filler ingredients. And typically they're going to be storing and handling the supplements properly, so they have to be temperature controlled. They'll keep it refrigerated, like shipping it in an ice pack and that type of thing. So if you're having trouble finding a professional grade supplement, I also have a store where you can get quality supplements that you know are good and you can trust them. So I do get a small commission from sales, but I pass most of the discount on to the people who use the site, and it's a 20% off. So I'd like to encourage you to pick one thing that you would like to try that you learned today. Remember to be gentle with yourself and to make a small change. You don't need to overhaul your diet in one day. Small changes are actually more sustainable, and you can add them up over time. And good nutrition is not all or nothing. There are different levels that you can choose. You can choose to add in some good foods, like the foods rich in some of the nutrients we talked about today, and that will be bringing you benefits. So another step would be to eliminate certain foods or food groups and see if that helps you. And then a more involved approach would be to do a guided program to help determine your personal food triggers. So I'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. And everyone is probably starting at a different place today, and that's okay. And you get to decide what things are going to work for you or not work for you, and what's going to work best in your life. So just hang with me a few more minutes, and then I see some questions popping up on my other screen here. So the point is to do more of the things that take us away from the ditch and away from those flares. So let's stack the deck in our favor by figuring out first what helps and what harms us, and to help manage our HS. So I'm just going to breeze through some of the services that I offer because I know we're running up on time. When I started to make this webinar, I just kept finding more and more information that I wanted to share with people. So it didn't fit into an hour, and I ended up making a course. So I do have a sale going on right now for HS Awareness Week. If you're interested in learning more about the research in HS for lifestyle and nutrition. Also have some webinars coming out soon on immunity and inflammation. And the main package I've been offering people with HS is my LEAP package. And this is using that food sensitivity test. And I'm just gonna kind of breeze over some of this, but basically some of the research I mentioned earlier is using the IgG test. And the MRT is actually able to account for a much wider array of reactions than IgG testing. So because of that, I believe that the MRT is the most reliable and sensitive or accurate food sensitivity test, which is why I use it in my practice. And so the test will tell you how strongly your immune cells are reacting to foods and food chemicals, and that most people see improvement within the first 10 days. So these are just some sample results. This is not related. This isn't even an HS patient, so don't put any stock into like spinach being bad for you. Not what that means. This is just an example of what the report looks like. And I think we are going to send out the slides afterwards. So pretty much the point of the protocol is to eat your safe foods for about 6 weeks to calm your immune system down. And then also it will identify what your food triggers are. So there's more information about this on my website. Here's some questions to make sure that this is a program that is something that's good for you right now, and some testimonials, which is really why I love doing this in my private practice, is to hear stories and really help people. It's really rewarding for me. So I'm also running a sale on my Elite package for HS Awareness Week, saving $50. And then lastly, these are my other appointments and packages and my other specialties in case you know anyone else, or someone had a baby and needs breastfeeding help, I can help with that as well. And all right, let's see what the questions are.
Yes, thank you so much. That was such a great presentation. So much information, so many questions. I know I have so many questions and patients have questions. So what I'm going to do is dive in really quick to clarify some things. So we were talking about turmeric and the golden milk, which I really love. But I wanted to discuss one. I read online that to activate turmeric, the anti-inflammatory components of turmeric, you'll need to crack some black pepper within whatever you're taking turmeric with. So I don't know if that's true or not, or if you've heard that as well, before I just say that that's information that
I have heard that. I would have to look into exactly like how much is making it more bioavailable, because I think that's what it does. It kind of helps, like what you just said. It helps release what's in there. And foods, a lot of foods work synergistically, so they will help bring out a benefit of the other one. Like one food will help the other one. So that's not something that I have been like recommending exactly. But I have heard that. So I think, yeah, it's probably true. I'd have to look up, what percentage it's helping. I think you still get benefit from using it without some kind of amplifier like that. But if you're like really into and you want to add another spice in there, I think that would be a good idea.
Absolutely. And then too, I was really glad that you mentioned the yeast, because that actually gets into our first question from the attendees. Because that study, I remember seeing that study about brewer's yeast, or the long name. I was going to try to attempt to say it, but I was like, no, don't try to attempt it. And so it's interesting because Angie was asking, fermented foods can contain yeast. So isn't that bad with HS? And so as Jillian was saying, to use it in smaller amounts, but I know that in the study too, it was saying that even in small amounts, brewer's yeast can inflame HS. So this is not, obviously this is not going to be for everyone, but I remember like a few months ago, I had wine, sangria, and I had like a sip, literally a sip with like my girlfriends. And the next day I had a nodule on the back of my leg. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that, and I wanted us to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So it's just such a wide variation of what people are sensitive to and what they're not. So what helps, or what, you had that reaction and the next person might have a whole glass and be fine. So it's really just crazy. Nutrition is like really cool and, frustrating too in that way. So also like I heard a case study, or just a anecdote, that someone had some grapes and just the yeast that can be on the outside of grapes caused some issues. So all that to say, it's really individual for the person and like personal triggers, and that's where the food diary can really help, or the food journal, as I like to call it, with tracking what you're eating and then your symptoms, because you can really, because when you're tracking that, you're going to be writing down like what you're eating and how much. And you can do this too without even doing LEAP. You can just use I have a template if you're interested, but you can use the one I showed earlier too. So writing down much that you're having and if you're having any symptoms, because that way, or the timing of your symptoms, so that way you can look back and see what you were eating before you had that flare. And you might be able to determine, like you said, a sip of wine. So it's already very small. But if it had been like a glass of wine and you had a flare, but you might be able to find, like, if you can get away with like a couple sips, or you can get away with a half a cup. It really just depends on your body. So I think the best way to do that is to keep a food journal for a while, just to help identify those things and identify what your threshold is, because you might be able to handle a little bit, but then if you have a whole cup or something, that might be pushing you over the edge, and things add up and you have a flare. And also, to confuse things, everything's kind of cumulative. So depending on what else is going on in your life at that time, are you stressed? Because that's going to take up space and take up, that's also going to fill your bucket with some inflammation potentially. So it's all these different things too, that one day you might be able to handle that. And then if you're also having other triggers and other stressors, you might not be able to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no simple answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And, that's the whole thing about it. And that's why we are having this conversation, so that we can just clarify and just show patients that there are different options and there are different ways to looking at this approach. And I wanted to throw in there too that mushrooms is also a vegetable that comes in contact with yeast as well, just like grapes do. So if you are allergic to mushrooms, be mindful of that as well. And just look up other foods like vegetables and fruits that come in contact with yeast, so that you're not inadvertently triggering because you think it's healthy for you. I've had to go through that because last year I was a vegan. Now I'm a pescatarian. So yeah. I wanted to move on to the next question. Stephanie was asking, she said, I suffer from a thyroid condition as well, which limits foods. Any suggestions for fiber? Any supplements? That might be hard because you're not sure maybe like what she's already restricted.
Yeah, I'm thinking, actually, one of my colleagues I went to nutrition school with, she specializes in thyroid nutrition. So I'd have to ping her to figure out exactly what those diets are. I think it's gluten-free for the most part, so I'm not sure what vegetables are restricted. But whole grains and vegetables are going to be the best sources of fiber, fruits too. And for a supplement, oh, I haven't been asked this question in a while. I'm trying to remember the best one for that. It's purple. Miralax maybe, or I think I'd have to get back to you on that one for a fiber supplement. So you can send me an email.
Would you mind putting your email address in the chat?
Oh, sure.
We can reach out to you if they have any questions, I guess, that weren't answered.
Specific. Yeah, absolutely.
The next one is, do you have any tips for HS, for being a vegan with HS? That's always interesting because, yeah, it's just interesting because I had this struggle of being afraid of eating meat because I thought that was causing my HS. And so last year I realized I had to eat fish in order to get the nutrients that I actually needed, because I was subtracting so many things out of my diet, like tomatoes and potatoes and grains and legumes, everything. So I think this is a beautiful question, because there are probably some patients who are adapting the vegan diet and might be in the same space that I was, that they have to take out all of these different foods. So it's like, what can we do as vegans with HS?
Yeah, so I think it's really personal, again, about what foods might be bothering you and what foods you can get away with. And if you're vegan strictly, there are some nutrients that you probably will have to supplement. And so it kind of depends on your reasons too for being vegan. Like some people can, it's for like animal, to protect animals, and some people don't have that so much. So, and then also like the food trigger for HS aspect as well. So if you can include some fish, like that will also give you some omega-3 fatty acids and also some vitamin D. So I don't know if those are some of the things that drove your decision, but you would have to be, I'd recommend talking to a registered dietitian to look at your diet. Like you write down a couple of food journals for what you're eating, and they can look and see if you have any gaps in your diet. And then you might want to either focus on certain foods to fill those, or if they're not available based on your personal choice, or it causes issues in your body, looking at supplements.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Speaking of supplements, I recently started taking collagen, and I noticed one of the reasons that I went into remission years ago was because there was a higher production of collagen because I was working out constantly. Does collagen help to strengthen the skin and prevent some um, of that basement membrane like breaking down, sort of like vitamin D does and zinc? Does that also help? Or have you heard anything about that helping to alleviate some of the symptoms with HS?
I'm writing this down. No, I haven't looked into collagen specifically. I haven't seen any, there's not any HS and collagen studies because I think I would have found those. But it's very interesting because it does help, like looking at the research or thinking about it without, HS just in general, it does help with your skin. And I know some of my other specialty is like pregnancy, and like your skin is stretching during that time. And there's an amino acid called glycine that becomes conditionally essential when you're pregnant, and that is something that comes from like collagen type foods. So mostly like a good example there would be like pulled pork if you cook it real slow. Also pork rinds, which are those in in the snack aisle in a bag. So that's kind of where my mind is going for that. Yeah, I want to look into it more about the skin.
And what I'm talking about too is collagen peptides. They are,
Mhm.
you can get them in beef. You can get them in marine. I take marine peptides, and I take them every morning on an empty stomach. I'm just throwing that out there because I've seen that it's helping my HS. So I don't know if that'll help
Mhm.
anybody else. And I take that with
Yeah.
chlorophyll and aloe vera with alkaline water in the morning, and it just, yeah, it's been helping. So I just wanted to see if that was something that you have come in contact with as well.
Not yet, but now I'm gonna check it out.
Miranda says that she heard HS patients have a collagen deficiency. And she meant to ask her dermatologist. Yeah, that'd be interesting to find out if if the lack of collagen might have anything to do with, HS being persistent in the body. Moving to the next question,
Mhm.
um, it says turmeric chelates iron. How to, I'm sorry, hold on one second. Let me read this.
Yeah, I can see it too. I see what they're asking. So turmeric interfering with iron absorption. That wasn't something prominent in my mind, but like I said, I can go and check. There's so many things with nutrition. It's like kind of impossible to know and remember everything. I know definitely dairy interacts with iron absorption. So if the iron is, let me go back to that question. I see it. So I would just say to take the turmeric at a different time that you're having iron foods, so that way you're kind of avoiding that conflict, because what happens there is they both absorb at the same site. So if one is kind of taking up all the receptors, the other one can't absorb. So if you eat them at different times of the day, and that's the way to fix that. And so iron-rich foods, there's a nice rhyme to remember these. It's meat, beans, and leafy greens. There's other foods too, but they don't rhyme. So those type of foods you want to have separate from when you're having the turmeric, if you're concerned about that.
Bianca asked, once a food trigger has been eliminated, can it and should it be reintroduced, which I think is a great question.
That is a really, really good question. Okay, so that is where your food journal again comes into play. Some things you can reintroduce, and some things you just might find that every time you reintroduce it, you have an issue. And that might be just unfortunately a food that you can't have anymore. So what I do with my clients, because I have them do the MRT test, is the foods that are red are highly reactive. And this testing has been around since like, I think 2005. And a lot of my colleagues that are LEAP therapists have been doing it for a while. And what they generally see is that if you have a food that comes up as red on the test, you might not be able to reintroduce it. It's going to be it's probably going to cause a reaction in your body every time. From my personal experience, I've taken the test twice, and because your results change a little bit over time, and my red food is soy, and definitely every time I have like something with a little bit of soy, or if I have like a lot of soy in it, like edamame, like I can't tolerate that at all. So there's going to be different levels. Kind of, you might be able to handle a little bit, or if you're really sensitive to it, you might not be able to handle it at all. So that's where doing the food journal, and when you're, especially if you're reintroducing foods or doing a special diet, definitely keep a journal of how much you're eating of the food, everything that you're eating, and then on the other side, symptoms and what time you're getting the symptoms. Because food sensitivities can also show up delayed up to 48 hours, so 2 days. So sometimes you really have to be a detective to figure out, like, okay, how come, I had that symptom? So you might see a correlation every time I had the grapes, or every time I had the broccoli, or just, whatever the food is, you might find a correlation there.
Is there any way I mean, I feel like this question is I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. So with HS flares, like you said, there's food sensitivities usually show up in 24 to 48 hours. With HS flares, is there any possibility that something like eating peppers today could affect you 2 weeks later?
Yeah, I would not count it out. I'd say that's in the realm of possibility.
Okay, okay. Um, an anonymous attendee is asking, do you have any advice on finding a probiotic that is yeast-free? Yeah.
Hmm. Um, that's a good question. I don't know of any offhand. Like, that's not something that I've been, thinking about or doing. I'm able to look. So I'm on Elevate, which is the store I sent. That was the link in my slide, and I also have an Emerson account where I can see. So both of those places I can look up what's in all the supplements. So I can help you find one if you want to shoot me an email. I don't have one that I recommend offhand.
I would love to share one with everyone. There's one that I take every morning that actually it is it's non-GMO, vegan, pine-based vegan capsules, free of 8 major allergens, dairy-free, nut-free, gluten and wheat-free, soy-free, nightshade-free, sugar-free, celiac-friendly, keto-friendly. Okay, so it has everything. And this is Mary Ruth's pre and probiotic, and it helps with candida as well. So if you know, candida is the yeast that grows in our gut, and that can be aggravated, I believe, by brewer's yeast. I'm not positive. I'm not sure if they're connected. But anyway, candida, it helps to lower that so that your body can function the way that it needs to as well. So feel free to look into that. I take those every morning as well on an empty stomach. So
I like the Mary Ruth brand.
Yeah.
I've seen other stuff. Yeah. She has the liquid supplements, which can be good for nausea in pregnancy. So I've recommended those.
Yeah. And they're extremely clean. So when I take them, I haven't had any issues. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth a try. Angie is asking, she says, sometimes it's hard to know if the food I ate on Monday caused a flare or was a food I ate last Friday. How long does it typically take? So that's what we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's hard to know. I would say, again, keep the journal. And hot off the press, I have been a part of a proposal for a study to study inflammation from diet and HS. And it's going to be using the LEAP protocol that I just briefly breezed over with you guys. And you can read more about that on my website or on the slides. And we just found out that we got funded. Yay!
Oh, congratulations.
So, thank you. So we will be doing a study using LEAP on HS patients, and I've been doing it already in my private practice. And so that type of thing is what I'm curious to know too, like specifically for HS, like what is that window? Is it different than 2 days? Like what? Yeah, we're really interested and excited about that.
Absolutely. Bianca was asking, she said charcoal has been used to eliminate toxins. Would you recommend you take it if you think you've been exposed to a trigger food? And she's speaking about activated charcoal, so not the charcoal that you use for the grill. I just want to specify that.
To eat it? That's
Yeah, have you heard
you think?
people, so hospitals use it to help to remove toxins. Like if somebody does like if you accidentally ingest something, so within a certain frame like window, you can ingest activated charcoal, and it'll either come out through urine or fecal matter, and it won't absorb into the body. So there have been some, I guess, I don't know what you call them, like maybe herbalists or people who are just about nutrition who have recommended people take activated charcoal because it helps to remove a lot of like those toxins and metals and things that we consume unknowingly sometimes. And so I guess she's wondering if the activated charcoal acts sort of the way it does with poisons that you ingest in your body and things like that. I'm not sure if that's you.
I personally wouldn't recommend that because I haven't seen like the research myself. I do know that like for certain metals, like if you have too much of that in your body, the doctors, in the hospital will do something to chelate those, so to grab them. I don't know if they use activated charcoal. Now I don't remember learning that, but they potentially could. So that's not something I do or use, so I wouldn't recommend it. I'd have to look at the research, and also I'm thinking I don't know if it would really help because it depends on like how soon you're having a reaction to it, right? So if it's already in your gut, and it could already, if you have a leaky gut, it could already be in your bloodstream. So at that point, like, sorry, it's too late. Like, I don't know if it would really help you eliminate it any faster than just going, through your GI tract. So yeah, those are my thoughts, and I'd have to look into that.
And from the knowledge that I have about activated charcoal, and I mean, Google is all of our friends, and I usually go to Google to get clarification on things. And I'm not going to give a lesson on trusted sites right now because that's a whole like thing, but make sure it's a trusted source that you're getting this information from. So there's ways to check that, and that's the journalist in me. But I just want to say that activated charcoal is usually used for like poisons and things like that. Do a little bit more research, because like I was taking activated charcoal and supplements on a daily, and it made me constipated to the point where it was just really bad. So just be careful, because it needs to be extremely diluted in a certain amount. So just do your research and make sure that you research as much as possible before you take anything. And especially something like activated charcoal that is used to extract very deadly poisons, in hospitals and things like that. Okay. And so sort of, I wanted to move on to a different question. So there are some patients that drink alcohol, obviously. And so what is the effect of alcohol with HS? Have you seen, have there been any reports of patients experiencing any inflammation? I know wine and beer is probably on that list due to it being included with, brewer's yeast, but have you heard of anything for your regular liquors like, bourbon, tequila, vodka, gin, things of that nature?
I don't know specifics. I think I did have a slide in another presentation. I'm trying to remember where. It wasn't anything specific like that though, where I did mention alcohol as being, I think at the last HS conference, there was someone who mentioned that it's not recommended in HS or that it causes inflammation. And I tried to track down like some studies about it, and of course, like wasn't able to find much specifically. So I think they're just speaking generally that it's not recommended. I'm gonna see if I can find that real quick. What I do have, but I don't know specifically if they've looked at different ones, so, different types of liquor, like you're saying. And with the beer and wine, that could be like the yeast aspect too. That could be kind of affecting that.
Yeah.
And fermentation, alcohol is fermented, so depending on that process, that could also be a yeasty process too. So
I didn't think about that. I forget.
yeah.
So many things, people, so many things.
I know.
Another question. Uh, oh, the comorbidities associated with HS as far as leaky gut and IBS and IBD. Even though, and I mean, for those who don't know what comorbidities are, they are essentially diseases that can present with another disease but are not necessarily correlated. So for an example, you can have HS and PCOS, but they're not necessarily directly connected. And so like in this instance of IBD and leaky gut, how can patients manage both of those with nutrition, HS and IBS and IBD and leaky gut, I would say.
That's a lot going on. So there's different recommendations for like each of those conditions. Which ones did you mention?
Leaky gut, IBD, and IBS.
So if you are having gut issues at all, like either the IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, or the IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, so those are different. And so with the inflammatory bowel disease, you have ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So the other two, the IBD, they are already having a lot of like gut dysfunction. They just kind of wreak havoc on your gut, and sometimes like if it's really bad, they have to go in and like cut some sections out. So you might be having some food kind of leaky gut already, just kind of because like it's already compromised and there's a lot of damage going on there. And so there's what we call medical nutrition therapy that is a certain way of eating for IBD and so that's Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So I would have to consider, everything's personalized. So I'd have to consider what those recommendations are with what, and cross-reference it with the HS recommendations. Kind of like today when I talked about microbiome, a lot of microbiome things intersect, but hold up, wait, like the yeast might be an issue with HS. So there's a lot of things you have to consider. And so I would recommend talking to a dietitian, which a lot of times in those conditions, hopefully hospitals and health systems refer to dietitians. I know here I'm in Ann Arbor, and we have some GI dietitians at U of M, University of Michigan. So I would refer out to those specifically. I don't work with that condition myself, so I would want to probably look into it a little more, or potentially refer out depending on the stability of that, because it's a really complicated thing, and you want to have good medical management of that, especially the more serious ones. Irritable bowel syndrome is a little bit different, and that's actually a diagnosis of exclusion. So what that means is it's not a defined, like if you have XYZ, you have IBS. It's pretty much like, we didn't find anything else, so your bowel is irritable. So a lot of people have IBS, like I have it, but it's really like, it can be totally different from one person to the next, and you might have different food triggers and different things going on. So like my husband has it as well, and every time he has popcorn, he gets really bloated, but like popcorn works fine with me. So it really just goes back to the whole like the food journaling and figuring out what works for your body. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And I guess that would be the same answer for, we had an attendee ask about PCOS as well. So I think definitely look into finding a nutritionist that you can align with and a dietitian. But I was wondering, out of that, if you would be able to provide any like foods that help with hormone regulation, which I know is an issue with PCOS.
So with PCOS, you want to focus on some of the things I talked about. So you're managing your blood sugar and managing those insulin spikes. And so that would be focusing on the low glycemic index foods, making sure that when you're having carbohydrates, you're also having some fat and protein with it. And so all of that's going to minimize how much your blood sugar is spiking, how much insulin you have. And that can also, the insulin spiking is really what drives a lot of the comorbidities. So even like the excess weight and the risks that go along with that, the heart disease, and now I'm blanking on the other ones. The whatever I said earlier, diabetes, that's the main one that for some reason I forgot. So that's why I really try to talk about in a couple different ways on the slide, and having that graph and those beads show up again is managing your blood sugar and making sure, like, when you're looking at your plate and thinking of your plate, having it half of it half of the vegetables will really help, because vegetables are a lot of them, inherently low glycemic index, unless you're looking at the starchy ones like the potatoes and peas. Then those are, I actually don't even consider those vegetables. I move them over to the starchy part of the plate. And so if you're thinking about every plate and balancing the macronutrients, making sure that you're having a lot of vegetables, that you're having a protein with every meal and snack, because the protein is really going to help balance the blood sugar too. Like, as I mentioned, when you're having them together, is fat different, when you're having the different macronutrients together, so that's fat, protein, and carbohydrates, it has a different effect. So it's going to mitigate how much just the carbs is going to spike your blood sugar, because they're all going to be working together.
Absolutely.
So those are some of the things. And actually, I just shared that I had that study funded on the Skin Dietitians Facebook group, and Angela Grassi, who's the PCOS dietitian, like, congratulated me and said she sees a lot of it in a lot of HS in her PCOS clients. And I asked her if she wanted to collaborate, and she said yes. So I'm kind of fangirling over that. And so stay tuned. We might have like a webinar or something. But we'll see what that collaboration looks like.
Yes, awesome. We have one last question before we wrap up. Do you have any research regarding gluten as a food trigger for patients with HS at all? Have any patients presented with that you know of?
So like a list of gluten containing foods or something like that?
Well,
I know I have
gluten in general, I guess. So anything containing gluten, have patients had any reactions or had any triggers for consuming those products that you know of? Any research that's available?
So what kind of, a lot of gluten containing foods might have yeast too, so that like reminds me of those HS studies. And I have to look again, nothing's jumping to my mind, but gluten is a very common like trigger in general for issues in your body. So some people can't really tolerate it that well. And then it's a spectrum, right? So people who really can't tolerate it have celiac disease. That's really serious, and you shouldn't have any at all, because it damages your intestines. And if you're looking for like a source, because gluten hides in a lot of different things, it can be in like sauces and just everywhere. So if you're looking for like a handout, you can send me an email. I have some materials, or can direct you to some websites.
Yes. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I know that everyone got a lot of information today. And if you have any questions, Jillian's website and her email address are right here in the chat. So please take a look at that and copy that down so that you can reach out, look at her services, reach out to her for any of her other questions or anything of that nature. I want to thank you so much on the behalf of My Gold Lining Incorporated for providing your time, your talent, and your knowledge to help to educate the HS community. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you everyone. And I had to wrap my HS awareness shirt today. Yes. Cut off in the camera.
Yes, I love it. Tomorrow is day 4 of the HS Awareness Summit. And for day 4, we have a wonderful conversation about caregiving for HS patients. We are going to have some caregivers on to talk about what it's like to support HS patients, not only in the hospital, not only at home, but through surgeries, through diet, through supplements, through everything. We have 2 very knowledgeable caregivers. So come on and join us, and make sure that you tell your caregivers to come and join in case they want to get some information, and your friends, because sharing is caring, and they need to care for you as well. So we will see you back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you so much, everyone. I love you, and I hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.